Welcome to The Value of One, the Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders, and this podcast highlights the stories of the people that make this program special. I'm your host, Ray Pryor, 2015 Ron Brown Scholar. After meeting each other for the first time at Selection Weekend in Washington, D.C. as high school seniors, it's common for Ron Brown Scholars to run into each other outside of RBS events at other junctures in their careers. They may go to school together, work for the same organizations, share the same stages, and sometimes they win the same awards. That happened in a special way when not one, not two, but three Ron Brown Scholars from the same class also became a part of the most recent class of Obama-Chesky Voyager Scholars, one of the most prestigious honors and opportunities for college students committed to public service. In this episode, you'll hear my separate conversations with Kishanti, Faith, and Aisha, three Ron Brown Scholars from the class of 2023 who are all Obama-Chesky Voyager Scholars heading off onto their voyages this summer. We chatted about their interests in public service, stretching from STEM and education to technology and mental health, what drew them to the Obama-Chesky program, and the funny moment when they figured out that they would all be a part of the same cohort again. After that, you'll hear my conversation with Makenna Turner, a 2020 Ron Brown Scholar who paved the way for Kishanti, Faith, and Aisha as the first Obama-Chesky Voyager Scholar in Ron Brown history, who was also part of that program's inaugural cohort. She'll share her reflections on technology and identity in Silicon Valley after interviewing underrepresented founders about their experiences and processing her own experience going through Y Combinator.
Well, I would say there are issues and avenues of interest that draw me. One, I'm really engaged in community building. I've found that community is something that is expansive and it doesn't just have to be synonymous to geographic location. And so going abroad and studying in the three African countries I studied in, I was able to study in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. And through those experiences, I learned the importance of community building and how your community reach is beyond the area that you're in. And your shared interests, your shared beliefs can be expanded to outside countries. And so that's one kind of area that I'm interested in. And then outside of that, I particularly am interested in mental health advocacy. That's why I'm double majoring in psychology and youth and social innovation, which is in the ed school or the education school, because I really want to understand how to advocate for mental health literacy within schools. And I, in the future, want to open up mental health practices cross-continentally. So some in the United States and then some in Africa to kind of meld my interests in both, cultivating African history and culture and also my passion for mental health. And also, I'll give a nod to my identity. The reason why I'm so passionate is because I'm Liberian. So my two worlds colliding.
You just coined something that I've heard before, but I hadn't really thought about until you crystallized it for me. The term mental health literacy, that no differently than traditional literacy of learning to read and write or financial literacy of learning the basics, understanding the experiences and emotions that you have as a human being, as a kid, and being able to articulate them and process them. It's not just something that people need to go get help when they're in a crisis or if they have a specific condition, but it's just something that is a skill, is a tool, just like everything else that you might learn in school. That's really essential. So I like how you framed that as a more matter of fact and something everybody needs, as opposed to something that is unique only to certain people in certain situations and not something that we all need to be conscious of at all times. You're Liberian, you've spent some time on the continent and you're studying here. What differences have you seen or experienced in how people talk or think about mental health here in the United States versus, I don't want to just generalize all of the continent, but in other places that you traveled to and lived in? Are things pretty similar in kind of in terms of stigma and education, or are they different in some ways?
Yeah, I'll give an example first. So I was able to study in South Africa through a J-term program at UVA. And so we worked with the Black Power Station in Makenna, which was formerly Grahamstown. And so we learned about a practice called Ubuslanti, which is a unifying practice where community members come together and they talk about community issues, and they form ideas of how to improve on those issues. And it's in a space called a crawl, and it's typically used for herding cattle. But the crawl is a space where people sit in a circle and they have these conversations and they learn and they listen from one another. And so I was sitting there and I had an epiphany. I was like, this is a form of mental health practice, a form of therapy, but it's not traditionally known as such within Western practice. And those communal spaces, those conversational spaces allow for them within South African culture. They really emphasize community and community building. And I learned that traditionally, those things that they hold close to one another, they just aren't traditionally known as mental health practice. And so I wanted to learn, hey, how can we expand more on the definition of Western mental health practice by understanding what other cultures bring to the conversation? And one thing that I learned was that healers are common within African culture, and healers can be under the scope of mental health practitioners, helping people, whether it's aiding them in lifestyle development and things along those lines. So I wanted to learn, okay, how do terms within African culture differ in contrast from typical terms such as like a psychologist or a psychotherapist, contrast and compare? And how can that inform culturally relevant mental health practice?
Yeah, that's great. It's not a situation where thought leaders in the West need to just copy and paste or implant whatever we think mental health is everywhere else in the world, but rather, uh, even though it may not sound like a psychologist or may not be called group therapy, there are things that we can learn from those methods and impact. That's really great. I know that a big part of being in the Obama-Chesky program is you guys have this summer where you get opportunity to travel or to go somewhere. Do you have any ideas or dreams of where you might want to go? Maybe back to some of the places you studied abroad, or maybe some new places too?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in going back and studying in South Africa. I feel like there's something that was left there that I need to go back and explore. I'm thinking about going back to Makonda. I was able to speak with community leaders and government officials there and learn about how they're trying to destigmatize mental health and provide more access to mental health practice. And for me, I don't want to spread myself thin. So I really want to capitalize on this experience and study in one particular place or a few places. So I probably will stay within the scope of South Africa, or I may go to, another African country that has like a community-based organization that I'm interested in. So I'll see how that goes, but that's where my exploratory phase is right now.
Yeah, that's great. A big part of Ron Brown is aside from the scholarship, is really the community. And it sounds like the Obama-Chesky program is very similar, that you don't just get these resources to explore, but you really get a powerful network of people who are around your age. You talked about a little older than you who can talk about their experience. What has anything stood out to you in the network of people who are connected to this program so far that you found particularly valuable or special?
I would say for one, when I announced that I was an Obama-Chesky Scholar, just the influx of senior Voyagers coming and being like, hey, I'm a senior Voyager. Let's connect. Let's talk. If you need me as a resource to help you, in scaffolding your summer voyage, let me know. And that there just a nod to how my experience will be in the future, just having an influx of support from, older scholars. And then outside of that, just the administration within the program, they're very supportive. And I can tell not only by the coaches that they provide us with, but also from the communication that we receive. They're very encouraging. They give us words of wisdom. And I think that's very essential, especially on a week-to-week basis, because they give us these week-to-week communications. And in those, they continue to encourage us and give us language to what we may be going through. And I found that really great. And I'm really excited for where it'll go from here.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. The cool thing is that you have some familiar faces with you in this year's class. You have two other people who are RBS class of 2023. What was it like to find out that you were also going to be with them? Did you guys know, or did you guys talk about it beforehand, or was it just something that you ended up finding out? Oh, you guys we're all going to do this thing together, and it'll be cool.
Yeah, so we get the announcement before everyone else. So it's a period where we have the information. And we got bios of every person, and then we got to see their pictures. And it's funny because Faith and I, we talk every blue moon. So she texted me and she said, Kishanti, are you an Obama-Chesky Scholar? And I was scared because nobody was supposed to know. So I was like, how did this get out? Because I didn't see any picture. And then I go to the picture. I'm like, wait a minute. And I see her. And then I also see Aisha in the picture. And I was like, okay, this is funny. This is crazy. But that's how it happened. And so I was just happy to know that I was in it with people who I've also had experiences with and I've met before. Because it can be kind of a daunting time because you're with 99 other Voyagers and you're stepping into a new community, a new world. But it's like, okay, yes, it's fun to be in this new community, but also I have people who I'm coming in it with, which is even better for me.
I think it's awesome, and it happens every once in a while with people in Ron Brown that you guys obviously meet all in DC for this amazing weekend in your senior year of high school, and many times you guys will re-meet at other events or things, but sometimes it can take a little while. Or you guys talk every once in a while, and then you meet up in programs like this. You meet up in grad school. You meet up at a company or an organization you work for later, or at a conference. And it's always nice to see somebody who and somebody who you kind of who they stand for just by the nature of
Right.
who they are, and it makes you feel like you're in the right place.
Yeah, I think a lot of that started for me when I was in high school. The way I envisioned my experience going was not at all how it actually was. In some bad ways, but also a lot of good ways. The pandemic happened when I was in high school, but it was interesting because I found myself kind of stepping into service at a time where the world needed it really, really badly. And so for me, that was just by tutoring third graders in English because I like kids in English. So I was like, okay, let me just do this because it can help me to feel something. I feel a sense of purpose. I think that's one of the most important things for me in my life is do I have purpose? Am I doing something that contributes to am I making something that's meaningful? And so I started with that. As time progressed, I kind of started being okay, I'm really interested in education. I'm seeing all these injustices in the public education system, specifically with school funding in Chicago public schools. Because I matriculated through Chicago public schools for K through 12. So I've seen a lot, and I had a good public school experience in terms of the quality of my education, but I'm also the child of an educator. And so that has given me a really unique lens onto the huge disparities that do exist within the system. And so I was like, okay, I can teach kids English and help them understand how to read better because, there were a lot of learning gaps caused by the pandemic. And then I was able to actually work with Chicago public schools with some of their Title IX policy, worked at the city of Chicago on environmental justice policy. And that was interesting because I got paired up with that because of my school's pre-law program. I didn't even know what environmental justice was. I was working with engineers. Yeah, I was not expecting that whatsoever. But I actually found a lot of passion in that and just figuring out okay, how can I make sure that there's a pipeline for when there are environmentally concerned decisions that are happening in certain neighborhoods. And I ended up being able to have a pretty big impact on education in my city. I care a lot about education. That's just really important to me. I care about storytelling a lot. I think there's a lot of power in it, and that kind of ties back to me being a sociology nerd. For me, storytelling is an outlet for that because I just like the idea of exploring what is humanity? Why are we like this? And using my gift with words to tell stories that make people think more about why am I like this? Why do I want this? Why do I do things in this way? Just to make people think deeper about themselves. That's really what I care about.
Shortly after hearing the great news that you're accepted, you end up finding out that you recognize two of the people who are also going to be a part of your class. Tell me a bit about what that moment was like when you realized that you and two other Ron Brown scholars from the class of 2023 were also going to be Obama-Chesky Voyager scholars as well.
I mean, like, I just thought it was funny because I'm like, of course. Like, of course it's y'all. The reason I found out, like, because they released a thing where, well, basically they told us, like, who we were, like, so we could, like, learn more about each other. But that's not how I found out. I found out because I was being nosy. So there was, like, this little picture collage of, like, all our headshots and whatever. And so, of course, I'm being nosy, and I zoom in, and I'm just, like, looking at each face. And I'm like, is that? So then I text her. So exactly what I put in the text. But I was like, "You're a Voyager Scholar? Like, what are we doing?" And then she doesn't respond. She calls me. I don't know, probably not trying to have a digital footprint of her saying, yeah, very smart. But yeah, she calls me and we're just on the phone like, you can't see my face, like, on the recording. But, like, we talked for a long time. I mean, mostly just, like, about how excited we were or whatever. But, like, it was just really cool because, like, I remember going to selection weekend in my senior year of high school and, like, meeting everyone. Me and Kishanti got, like, really close then. So, like, to see that, like, we're both in the same program and we both got accepted, and then, like, Aisha got accepted too, like, it was crazy. And so, like, later, like, I go back and I'm like, "Oh my god, Aisha's there too." And so I'm like, the fact that 3 of us out of 100, in my opinion, like, those are pretty big odds. So, like, of course, like, when you're, like, dealing with these kinds of people or whatever, like, you know, you're gonna have some people who end up doing, like, these really crazy competitive things. Like, I just saw, my girl Amasafi was in the New York Times, and I was like, "Why are you in the New York Times?" Like, not like why, but I'm like, so this is actually, like, Ron Brown behavior, like, insane. But yeah, I'm excited. I think it's really cool. I'm not really that surprised, if I'm being honest.
I'm all passionate about STEM and STEM education.
Yeah, that's great. Can you tell me a bit more about what made you passionate about that, maybe from the beginning? And it sounds like you're already some work related to it now.
Yeah, I think I've always been passionate about STEM. As when I was young, my family moved to the UK for my dad's PhD. He got his PhD in chemistry. And so from a young age, I've always thought of education as something very important to me. And in terms of specifically STEM education, I started interning at this company called the National STEM Honor Society my junior year of high school. And that in that org company, our main goal is to bring about STEM learning opportunities through STEM chapters at different schools across the United States. And that just expanded my interest in STEM education because there's a lot of advocacy for education itself, but I think STEM education is a growing field where I believe it's important for students to also get involved in that. And STEM education equips students to be able to actually make change at the level that we're seeing now with artificial intelligence and more. So being able to provide students everywhere with this opportunity will truly be the method of equipping them with what they want to do in the future. So I distinctly remember in 5th grade, I was in a math class and I went home and told my parents and my sisters, "Oh, I want to be a mathematician because I love math so much." And I think I've just always been drawn to STEM and the sciences, but I was also drawn to the social sciences and the humanities. So I'm majoring in both biochemistry and political science, which although they might be viewed as distinct fields, as we were seeing today, they're not mutually exclusive. So I think I've always been drawn to STEM and I wanted to sprinkle in some politics as well because I think that's really important.
Doing the voyage and having the opportunity to travel and study and explore is exciting. I also know I heard you guys do a decent amount of programming and webinars throughout the year kind of leading up to it. Has anything kind of stood out so far in some of those leadership workshops or getting to talk to some of the speakers that have come in so far?
Yeah, the most impactful or moving rather workshop we had was when previous Obama-Chesky Voyager scholars talked about the summer voyage. And I remember an individual that did it last year, who is currently a senior in college now, discussed their voyage and how they were able to do an internship at Harvard. They shadowed / worked with a surgeon in Kenya. They did work in Alabama, and they also went to Norway. So just hearing all the combination of things that they were able to do really inspired me to think about how I can truly make an impact for other people. But in addition to that, give myself a good experience in helping others while also enjoying my summer.
Why not have both? I think that's a big part of it, and
Yeah.
of why they give you not just money to go do things, but they really want you to go travel. Is that you discover more about yourself as you discover about the world. Yeah, that's great. So when you heard the news that you were selected, and then eventually heard the news that 2 other people in your Ron Brown Scholar class were coming too, did you guys know that you all had applied and you all had gotten in, or was that something you guys discovered whenever you saw the list and were like, oh, wow, I recognize some of these people. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the foundation sent us an email with a collage of our headshots of all the people that got the scholarship. And it was a small image, so I remember zooming in to see, oh, do I know anyone? Because when I was applying, I always thought that there would be other Ron Brown scholars as well, because both the Ron Brown Scholars Program and the Obama-Chesky Voyagers Program have similar missions of public service. So I was always expecting another Ron Brown scholar to also receive the scholarship. But no, we did not know that we were applying, or we just found out when a lot of other people found out.
Yeah, that's cool.
To actually go back to the question regarding Ron Brown scholars and Obama-Chesky Voyagers, Makenna has a YouTube channel, and I found out about this scholarship through that and through her, which is very interesting because I remember senior year of high school watching her video on how she was able to get 1 million plus scholarships to pay for college. And I remember watching that video and taking notes of the scholarships that I could apply to. But the Obama-Chesky Scholarship was not on there. So I Googled her to see if I could maybe message her on LinkedIn or something to kick her brain. And I'm pretty sure she popped up on the Obama-Chesky website. And then that's how I found out about the scholarships. That's a really full circle moment for Ron Brown scholars and Obama-Chesky scholars.
That is awesome. I didn't know. And it's funny that you share that, because I have a somewhat similar experience where a Ron Brown scholar that I met in a program, I guess not all that different than Obama-Chesky in high school, is the first person to tell me about Ron Brown, because I didn't know about it at the time, and maybe I was a sophomore, junior. And then things work out, and still kind of a mentor to me today. To my knowledge, you were the first Ron Brown scholar for a while to go through it. We've had other captains and other people I was able to look up who participated, but you're the first. And then a little while ago, we find out that 3 folks are following in your footsteps, and not just following in your footsteps in the sense that they're doing the same program, but that at least one of them found out about the program from your YouTube channel. How does that feel, knowing that you've kickstarted a trend? You are the first of building this lineage of this crossover that might end up lasting for decades, forever.
Yeah. Well, I was one of the inaugural cohort for the Obama-Chesky Scholarship for Public Service. And that meant, like, my mom actually saw an ad for the program on her Instagram and sent me it the day it was due. And I was at a conference, and I filmed, like, in a conference hall and in the back of a room, my video. And I had no idea whether I was going to get this scholarship or not. But it was so unique. It was one that allowed you to go explore and travel and learn something about the world in a more tangible way. And in a lot of ways, that is the point of college, is you go and you live in the real world for a little bit after you've spent your whole life either with your parents or just in school. And if you do a study abroad, you even get more immersion. But this was kind of like an independent study abroad where you get to go explore in any way that you want to do. My background at Stanford is computer science. I also did like a sub-track in product design and mechanical engineering. And so I was somebody who was always in a lab. And public service and public policy and international relations, all of these things were I was super interested in growing up, and I was interested in high school, but I found my love and I found my passion in tech. And one of those places in tech was tech policy in the intersection of technology. So tech and education. I published research when I was in high school on the intersection of technology, education, and machine learning. And so when I went to the website to apply for the scholarship, I saw a little asterisk at the bottom that said something about if you were an engineer, if you're in STEM, but you're interested in like public policy around that subject matter, this is also for you. So it's not just for people who are straight up in the social sciences or focusing on going into government. It's also people who have an expertise in tech. And so I went on a whim, I applied the same day, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And it was brand new then. And so, I talked about it publicly a lot. And, to this day, to know that people watch my YouTube channel and have gotten real tangible information for themselves that I, for years, struggled to collect for myself, it makes my day every single time I hear that somebody has watched it and found something meaningful from it, because that's why I leave it up and that's why I posted it in the first place. And so to hear that there's 3 Ron Brown scholars who are now also a part of this other scholarship is super exciting. I'm so excited to see what kind of voyage that they take themselves on. And, my voyage, in the same vein of technology and public policy, I really wanted to understand what was in people's way, specifically like around, Silicon Valley, firstly. It's a place where you think there's a lot of diversity and you think there's a lot of diversity of thought. And it's also a place that has been prided as, somewhere where you can come with an idea and somebody will believe in you to go pursue that idea and make it real. And then when I came to Stanford in 2020, there was a lot of things that were going on. First, it was COVID. There's basically nobody really there. People who used to work at these big companies like Apple and Google, they're all working from home and remotely, and COVID was still happening. And so all of that framework kind of for feeling seen as somebody who's into entrepreneurship, into startups, it kind of crumbled in a more like real world fashion. And as we emerged from COVID and I started to do research in management science and engineering, which is a department at Stanford, and I was, learning more about what that impact was like on workers in tech. The hybrid environment and how that affected people of color specifically in finding places that they felt seen. One thing that I realized for myself after like interning at Amazon was, man, it's really hard when you don't know anybody to understand where you belong and what's going on, right? And so that framework that I built off of that research then reflected into the voyage that I built through the scholarship, where, I first started off in an independent study under a professor at Stanford. And I wanted to learn more about, how do Black female founders, how do just Black founders in general feel about the state of Silicon Valley? Do they feel seen? What is the real tangible experience behind the statistics of, only so and so fractional % of founders are Black women? Founders with funding are Black women, right? And it's like, is it because Black women aren't trying to be founders? Or is it because Black women don't feel comfortable being founders? Like, what is the real reason behind this statistic? And so I started to interview people, and the issue that I ran into was that there were not very many Black female founders to interview. So I ventured out to more of just founders of color. And I asked them like in detail. I was trying to do more qualitative research on what is your experience like here in Silicon Valley? What do you think needs to change? What have you realized like your identity has reflected on your personal experiences and people believing in your ideas and wanting to support your ideas out here as an entrepreneur? And I learned that there were just so many barriers that people were facing. But even more so reflected, I wanted to understand what are the barriers that people are facing internationally in these marginalized groups, right? So not just, Black Americans, but how are women, in Eastern Asia facing discrimination when they are trying to be entrepreneurs or enter the tech space? How are women in, Northern and Central Europe facing those similar issues. What are the issues that are stopping women from either entering tech or entering entrepreneurship? And so alongside my independent study, I built out this plan and this voyage to then go visit 10 countries in Europe and in East Asia to understand, what are these sociocultural, socioeconomic, political barriers that people are facing in these pursuits. And I learned very interesting things from my interviews with a lot of people in those spaces. And I won't keep elaborating on what those things were, but every single chasm has just, its unique issues. And you can go into, let's say, Denmark, right? And you'd think, why are women not in the tech workforce? It's not because they don't get paid maternity leave. It's not because they don't have good health care. It's a lot of different reasons. And one of the most common reasons that I realized that differed from Asia and that differed from Silicon Valley was women don't have to be engineers to survive, right? And one of the things that pushed a lot of women into engineering in Silicon Valley and in the United States was as the cost of living rose and as the single income household depleted and became a two-income household, women had to find high-paying industries to go into. And so there was this large, overwhelming push of women into tech that other countries, some countries in Asia experienced, but other countries in Europe did not experience because they had these social safety nets, right? And so it was just this incredibly eye-opening experience where you see how all of these social policies build on top of why other countries don't build in tech the same way that the United States does or the same way that China and Japan do, and it's just everything builds on everything. And as a student, that was so eye-opening because it was just informal enough of research that I could ask any question that I wanted and I didn't have to go check with my PI on it or go write an IRB to make sure that I was doing this correctly, but also just formal and funded enough that I could really pursue those questions deeply.
Wow. What a voyage and what insights that you drew from that. Maybe if you could pick something as it relates to maybe, you just say Black women in the United States who are maybe aspiring founders or who are engineers. Based on all of the things that you've learned and observed in other countries as well, what's a piece of advice that you would give to them so that they can better understand their own feelings, experiences as they kind of navigate this space that they haven't maybe studied as much as you do and are trying to come up with it as they go? Certainly things that you've taken in your own experience building as well. What's kind of been your takeaway for how you kind of live your life now and pursue different opportunities as a result of that?
Yeah. I think one thing that has always stood with me, and that it was a realization that I came to when I was doing research at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I was 16. And just one day it hit me like an epiphany that I was the first Black female scientist that I knew, and that I had never met another Black female scientist. And it was kind of a feeling of loneliness, but at the same time, it was a feeling of pride because I realized that somebody had to be the first one, right? And I'm, of course, not the first Black female scientist to ever exist, but I could be the first for somebody else, right? The first one that they know. And it can be very intimidating to walk into rooms where you really are the only person that looks like you. And I'm somebody that grew up in Boulder, Colorado. This is not a very diverse place. I'm very used to being one of few, if not the only person that looks like me in a room. But the more you move up in a space, the more uncomfortable it can be because of the power and responsibility that identity now holds in that room, right? And you kind of feel like even though you aren't, you feel like you are representing everybody like you in that space, but somebody has to do it, right? That's just the simple fact. Somebody has to be the first in that room. Somebody has to make it welcoming for other people like themselves or otherwise, right? And I like to feel empowered to be that person. And so when I was at Y Combinator, I was genuinely maybe one of 12 women, and I was the only Black woman. And of Black people, I might have been the only Black American. There was a couple from England, but there were, I don't think, any people that I met who were from the United States. And so that was a moment where, I looked at the room of 500 people and I genuinely, statistically significantly, did not see anybody like me. And in that moment, I realized that in some ways, I beat the odds. The odds were against me on ending up in that room, and that it was an opportunity to try to make that space more open for people like me in the future. And so, taking every opportunity where it does feel like you're marginalized to then open it up so it becomes more welcome.
Yeah, really well said. Maybe you can, what has being a Obama-Chesky Scholar meant for you after your voyage? And
I've said this to my mom so many times. The Ron Brown Scholar Program, of any scholarship that I won, and I won a lot of different scholarships, but of all of them has been the most meaningful scholarship that I received. And it's been that community, not only at Stanford, but the trustees who are in the area. It's been, just the communication amongst my class year. Every single person that I have met within the organization, they are there with purpose and they want to help and they want to make the community thrive. And I think that thrive factor is really the meaningful thing about the Ron Brown Scholarship Program. And I hope, and Ron Brown has such a long legacy. That's one of the really significant things is you can see people from who became scholars in the year that I was born and what they've done over their lives in the entire span of my lifetime, which has been their adult lives. And it just really allows you to see all the things that you're capable of doing and the potential that you have in this world to go do things and make change. And as the inaugural cohort of the Obama-Chesky Scholarship, I have to step back and think in the same way. When I go to the American Journey Awards and I see that there's the inaugural, cohort of Ron Brown, that's what I am for the Obama-Chesky Scholarship, right? I'm that first cohort. I'm the first pancake. I'm the people they're testing stuff out on. And our feedback not only is super valuable for them and super valuable for everybody who comes after us, but it holds a lot of lessons and a lot of knowledge. And so, I've already feel like I've created a great community within the Obama-Chesky Scholarship, just of even people at Stanford, but well beyond that. But I'm hopeful with the coming years and more cohorts joining us that, we can all become a network kind of like Ron Brown, where, there's a lot of community building that goes on. There's a lot of events that can be hosted in areas that people are similarly in. A lot of people travel internationally and are working internationally now. And I think that's something super unique to the program where a lot of people are interested in international and public policy. And so they're wanting to go abroad and they're wanting to go and, work in these faraway places. And so you can now have people in these faraway places to connect to wherever you go.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.